Hi, everyone. So today we're going to be looking at the Northern Renaissance. So you should have open your notes on Classroom that say the Northern Renaissance. We're going to continue to add into this. And as I go through the slideshow, you can pause, bullet point your notes, and then you can move on. So the Northern Renaissance takes place in England, France, Germany, and Flanders. Flanders is what was originally France and the Netherlands. Over time, borders change, and it's just this location. I can show you on the next slide where I do have a map. So remember, when we started with the Renaissance, we were looking at Italy, particularly Florence, and now we're expanding throughout Europe. This period is known for woodcuts and engravings. William Shakespeare, the playwright, and his deep understanding of humans as well as dramatic conflict. And when we look at this map, we can see where Italy is. Right over here, it looks like that boot. And this is where the Renaissance started. And then we do see this spread. So we see the spread of ideas, and it eventually moves to Northern Europe. So we see right over here would be Germany. If we go west, we see France. Right in here is modern day Belgium, but this would be the Netherlands. So this area is Flanders. And then we see England. And England, of course, is where William Shakespeare is from. Some of the artistic ideas that spread, we have one artist, his name is Albrecht Dürer. He's a German artist and he creates woodcuts and engravings. So, again, something very common for this time. And then we have Jan van Eyck, who is a Flemish painter, and he starts to create paintings that are oil based. So if we think back to our activity that we did with the comparison art, we had the classical period, which focused on statues, medieval period, which focuses on tapestries, stained glass, and also those 2D. And then when we get to the Renaissance, we are seeing those elements of revival of the uh, Greek and Roman influence, but we're also seeing a new technique of oil-based painting. Something that we're going to be focusing on is this idea of a reformed society. So we're moving from the Middle Ages, we are now entering into the Renaissance. We discussed Machiavelli and his writing, what a typical ideal, I should say, Renaissance man or woman, what they're um, known for in terms of education and how they present themselves. And so, one person that we're going to be looking at is Erasmus of Holland. He wrote The Praise of the Folly, and it poked fun at greedy merchants, heartsick lovers, and pompous priests. So he's really critiquing people who are greedy and kind of snobbish. And he believes that in order to improve society, all people should study the Bible. He thinks that the Bible has the answers and that we can learn a lot of important lessons from the Bible. Whereas what we're going to be looking at this week is Thomas More's work. He creates this idea of a utopia, which means no place. And essentially, he writes about this imaginary land where there's no greed, corruption, war, and no use for money. And he's essentially arguing for a perfect society. And of course, it's fictional because this could never really happen. But what are components of a perfect society? So, in his case, he thinks it's a land where there's no greed, corruption, war, or money. And if we refer back to Niccolo Machiavelli, he thinks that people are naturally greedy, that they're corrupt, that the government could be corrupt if we don't strike a common balance. and people will do what they have to for money before they think about what's right or wrong. And so Thomas More thinks of this as what a perfect society is. But of course, we know this isn't always um, plausible. Again, this time we are talking about William Shakespeare. Many of you know about Midsummer's Night Dream and Romeo and Juliet. And so this time period is known as the Elizabethan age, and this is taking place from her reign of 1558 to 1603. And of course, this is named after Queen Elizabeth of England. Now, this is one of the most important parts of the Renaissance, and we're going to be discussing this in more detail when we get to the Reformation. And so, when I talk about any sort of piece of technology that has really helped people and changed globalization and the world around them, we're talking about the printing press. So, Johann Gutenberg of Germany developed the printing press in 1440. And with the printing press, it was this new technique to produce books quickly and cheaply. And so, if you look at the little statistic over to the right, it says that the printing press was able to create 3,600 pages per workday. And what you can't really see is that in contrast, without the printing press, a person would only be able to handwrite about 40 pages per workday. And so that's a lot. That's a drastic change. So as a result, books were again created quicker and they were cheaper. And one of the books that was the main seller is the Bible. And we're going to look at that. That's a bit of foreshadowing for when we get into our next unit. And we can also think about how, with the printing press, um, we're creating a more literate population. So, beforehand, if we think about the medieval times, the only people who could really read were those who might have been monarchs or nobles. We talked about monks, and monks were the ones who looked at the ancient scribes, the ancient scriptures, and they were the ones that were translating them. So, in order to read, you had to be higher class. But now that books are created quicker and they're cheaper, we're opening this up to a population of more people who can read. We're going to skip this video. This is just on the printing press. We can come back to that. And we're going to leave off with the legacy of the Renaissance. So again, we talked about the Greek and Roman influence when we looked at art, when we looked at law, when we looked at sort of the way of life. And we also focus on individual achievement. So we're focusing more so on the person rather than a movement. And in society, we do see new discoveries. We're going to talk later about the scientific revolution. Books, we see that William Shakespeare is producing works. We see Thomas More and Esramus, and they're talking about utopias. And when we think about Machiavelli with the legal proceedings and what should be a part of the government and how to strike this balanced government. So we do see that the Renaissance leaves with more positive changes.